Welcome back to the Hard Skills Show, where we take a deep dive into the most challenging soft skills required to navigate leadership uncertainty, complexities, and change today and into the future. I'm your host, Dr. Mira Brancu, psychologist, leadership consultant, and founder of TowerScope. And I want to welcome you to the new season, season 8, where we are focusing on endurance and leadership. And I literally cannot think of a better guest to kick this season off. Someone who knows how hard leaders struggle to sustain their energy and purpose while navigating relentless pressure. She's going to share with us the endurance leader model, and one that's not just for elite performance types, but also for lasting performance. And she's going to talk about cultivating ways of thinking, acting, and engaging that are satisfying and sustainable. So let me introduce her to you right now, Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista. In Inner Circles, and you can see if you're watching right now, she refers to herself as Dr. Ann B.E. for short. I don't know why you would want to give up Bowers-Evangelista. I love saying that, Bowers-Evangelista, but for some folks, it's much easier to say Ann B.E. She is the author of Endurance Leader, Leadership Longevity in a Fast-Paced World, which leverages the principles of endurance athletes to help leaders develop a long-term approach to leadership. She's the founder and president of Lumos LLC and the Endurance Leader, another LLC. As a clinical psychologist with an MBA, a master's in leadership, a master leadership psychologist with almost 30 years of consulting and coaching with organizations of all sizes and complexities, and as an Ironman triathlete, Ann brings her range of expertise to help her clients develop more satisfying, meaningful, and productive leadership. So welcome and great to have you on, Ann.
Thank you, Mira. It is a huge pleasure for me to be here.
Yeah, it is a pleasure for me for many reasons. Number one, you're one of the few who danced with me to my own music, so that means a lot.
Absolutely.
It's the little things. Second is, you and I are part of the Society of Consulting Psychologists, Division 13 of the American Psychological Association. And you were one of those first people to welcome me in and to be so kind and accommodating. And just, I think you focus without even realizing it on the making sure people have a feeling of belonging. And that is something that is rare for someone who was already at the height of your career at your level, who doesn't really need, any larger of a network. So many people, you're so connected, but it's those little things that I think not only, make me appreciate more about who you are, but I think as we start talking today, probably adds to this endurance leadership framework, I suspect.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thank you. That is so kind. And I'm so glad that you had that experience. I feel like in the Society for Consulting Psychology, we have so many great opportunities to learn from one another. And there's so much talent. I'm super excited about all of the talent I saw when you came through, and there's lots of talent we see coming forward. And I hope that some of our conversation today will help people who are in those talent pools to think about how they can sustain that over 20, 30 years, which many of them are looking at in terms of their leadership longevity.
For sure, for sure. And so let's start with the thing that I find most fascinating about how you got into this, writing about, speaking about endurance leadership. And I think, the most obvious to me, there are, probably some ways that is not obvious to me, but the most obvious is this Ironman triathlete. This is your background, what it takes to be an Ironman triathlete, which I can't even imagine, but it is endurance leadership, right? It's embedded in it. And I love to hear about your experience learning how to just embody this mindset of, doing the Ironman, and what what did you learn from it? What were those pivotal moments, the lessons that you extracted from it that connect to this idea?
Yeah, thanks for that. And something I don't think I've ever said before, but in what you just said made me realize, like, I wasn't born doing this. I did my first triathlon in 2002, and it was like a quarter of the distance of a full Ironman. And I was like, never again. One is
Interesting.
enough. Why would I ever do this again? I like
Oh,
cried
that's interesting.
and not because I was happy. So like my initial experience was really not great. And then I think when it really started to build was a few years later, I heard about an organization called Team in Training, which may seem adjacent, but it's really fundamental to the first part of the book. And it is an organization that operates as a fundraising arm of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And they train people from nothing to do marathons and triathlons
Wow.
and bike rides and all sorts of things. And you raise money for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society through that organization. And when I heard about that, I got really interested because suddenly there was purpose in the activity.
Mm.
Suddenly there was meaning for me in a way that there had not been before. And that was really the foundational element. At that point, I also wasn't, I thought people who did Ironman were crazy. I was like, never in a million years would I do that. And I am, I will disclose to your listeners that in 2 months, when I will be 57 years old, I will do an Ironman race as a fundraiser for pancreatic cancer research. And I've raised
Mm.
$10,000 already for it. And for
Amazing.
me, it's a huge part. So this connection of something very purposive, like there's some agency in it, like there's something beyond just myself. And I think it's fine to do any of these activities because there's a big fancy medal at the end. However, it's not particularly sustainable. And
Yeah.
especially when you get to these longer distances, that will not hold you. And that is absolutely a key element in understanding endurance leader concepts.
That makes a lot of sense. When we think endurance leader or endurance in leadership, we only think about, the part about sustaining through arduous, tumultuous, exhausting experiences. But the why, that's the important part. The purpose keeps you going, and that, it makes it worthwhile. So I really appreciated hearing that piece of it. I hadn't thought about that, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll just share that recently I was sharing with a number of colleagues about the concept. And one of my colleagues says on this call with like 20 other people, I really don't like the word endurance. I was like,
Interesting.
well, thank you for bringing that up because I think he was expressing what a lot of people think about. These terms are not things we like. We think of enduring as something horrible that we
Right.
have to just get through, right? And my thought is we are all going to have things in life that we are going to have to get through that are difficult and arduous and sometimes self-imposed. Don't we want to know how to get through those the best possible way we can? Don't we want to thrive in those moments? So to me, it's kind of like taking the word back and giving it our own power and agency around it rather than having it be something we like are afraid of and try to avoid. So
Yeah.
that's a huge part of why we'll talk about mental toughness is somewhat similar. Like that whole term is hard for people to get their arms around.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I also know, in addition to like having a purpose, there's always going to be things that throw you off of that purpose, or throw you enough for a loop that you start wondering, like, why am I here and why am I doing this? And I know as a Ironman triathlete, you also had, some of those kind of like pivotal moments questioning, so I'd love to hear more about, did you have any setbacks, anything that made you question whether you would continue? And then what did you do with that kind of
Absolutely.
experience?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I have a very very specific setback. I was training for my first Ironman through Team in Training in 2011, and I was in a pretty horrible bike wreck and I broke my hip.
Mm,
And it was very traumatic. I had to undergo emergency surgery. I lost a lot of blood, transfusions, the whole thing. It was not very
scary.
pleasant. It was very scary. And I remember very clearly, like, thinking in my head that somehow I was going to be able to recover between August and November. And one of the coaches was like, not in the cards, and I was a little bit I mean, of course, I had been training so hard for so long, and you just like, it's just gone overnight. But because I had been doing my racing through Team in Training and I had been really engaged, there was a team of 50 of us doing this race. It was incredible how many people, maybe it was less than that, but it was almost 50 people, which was incredible. And what I realized is what I cared so much about was being able to raise the money and being part of the team. And my mission really was, okay, I'm going to raise the money. In fact, I doubled the amount of money.
Mm.
It was pity money, but that's okay. That's fine. It's for a great cause. But I started showing up to practice just to support the team in a wheelchair because I couldn't do anything else. But that part of my identity, that part of being a teammate, was what really mattered to me. Getting a medal at the end of that race wasn't what mattered. And I think can be really true if we allow it to be in the leadership space too. How are we defining what our success really means to us, right? The organization might have a sense of what it is, but what does it mean to us?
Yeah, I really want to highlight a couple of things that you mentioned, which is how we choose to connect our identity makes a big difference in kind of like the longevity, the sustainability, the outcomes, and our own feeling about our own successes. Like if we tie our identity to, one point in time, one gold medal, whatever that is, and then you're not able to reach that, you're going to feel a lot more disappointed, a lot more frustrated. You're going to put, sort of like some negative experiences, but you ended up choosing, and this is a choice, you ended up choosing to see your identity as a teammate and what you can do to continue on for your team and be there for your team. And that is a different mindset in and of itself that
Right.
kind of shifts. And then the other that you mentioned was that you were willing to be adaptable in the role that you took on the team and the role that you took in just finishing the race. And that once you shifted into that new role, you were able to then embrace and continue regardless of kind of like how you were engaging, which I think is like very powerful.
It was a very powerful experience. And I went to the race. I mean, I was on crutches and I went to Arizona to cheer the team on and I was exhausted, but it was such a meaningful experience. In a way, it would have been a very meaningful experience had I done it. But I had such a different and in some ways, like a valuable experience I couldn't have had in any other way being this cheerleader, And so you're picking up something, and we can talk some more about it, that I emphasize in the book in one way. And then in the sport and performance psychology language, there's a lot around the different kinds of goals we have: outcome goals, process goals, and performance goals. And so often we focus on outcome goals. And that's the equivalent of saying, I want to win the race. Well, the reality is, whether or not you win the race depends on who shows up. Like if the world's best marathoner shows up, no matter how good you are, but if you're a regional marathon, you might win the race. So if your identity is in that outcome, you can be really, really disappointed. But if you think about process and performance goals, which are much more intrinsic motivators versus an extrinsic motivator, both can be motivating, but our intrinsic motivators, we have a lot greater sense of self-efficacy, a lot greater confidence, and we typically perform better when those are our primary motivators. And I think this becomes, again, really, really important in the leadership and team space.
Yeah, absolutely. I am noticing we're reaching an ad break. When we come back from the ad break, I want to quickly sort of go into what you took from that experience that changed how you approached the Ironman triathlete experience, and then how you extracted that into your own model and your own framework on endurance leadership. Okay. So we're at this ad break. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista, or Ann BE, author of The Endurance Leader. We air on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. If you're here right now watching us live, you can drop us a line, say hi, send us questions. We're on LinkedIn, YouTube, several other locations at talkradio.nyc, and we'll be right back in just a moment.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills on talkradio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista. And one of the things that I wanted to find out before we get into your framework, I actually have two questions now. One is, what did you take from the mind shift that you made after that experience and you started thinking much more about the process? You mentioned outcome, process, and performance goals. That sort of like led to this bigger framework of how you think about endurance leadership.
Yeah, I think that ultimately the thing that shifted the most was this notion of having your mindset anchored in something that is intrinsic to you. And so I talk about it in the book, that's kind of the whole first part of the framework is anchoring your mindset. And again, extrinsic motivators, rewards, recognitions, raises, promotions, those things can be motivating, but research shows they are not as motivating overall as those that are really intrinsic and lead to some better internal outcomes, like I said, self-efficacy. So I started realizing without kind of, I like to think of it as more than just knowing your why, because knowing your why, the answer is because, and I'm like, it leaves something. It's like a response to something. No, this is like deep, like what is it that is driving you? And if we can connect with that and keep that going, it helps us through those inevitable, horrible moments. I talk about a lot in the chapter, Run the Mile You're In, when it's metaphorically pouring rain and 42 degrees and you're, 20 miles into a marathon, right? Like all you want to, if the only thing motivating you is a medal at the end, you're not going to finish. It's too much. You're literally going, what am I here for? What in the world am I doing this for? And so that's where that connection really started from. And then the rest kind of built around that notion.
Beautiful. Okay, so Last quick question before we get into this. Some people might want to know what's the difference between outcome, process, and performance goals. And especially, I was thinking between outcome and performance goals. Some people might see that as the same.
Yeah, great question. And I'm going to do my best to represent the sport and performance psychology well. For those who might be on the call from that space, they can correct me, but outcome goals really are the results of some performance effort, right? So it is things like, in sport, it would be an award or a Super Bowl, win. In business, it might be a salesperson of the year award. It might be even winning a particular client contract. Those are outcome goals. As a result of these things, we will achieve this outcome, right? A performance goal is essentially saying I or we are going to try to get maybe X% better in this thing. Our performance is going to improve. We don't know if it's going to lead to this outcome, but again, in athletics, it might be, I'm going to try to reduce my minute per mile pace by 15 seconds, right? And so that's the difference is one is only gauged by like some internal metric that we're utilizing. Another is, does it result in something? So certainly a performance goal could lead to an outcome goal, but an outcome goal might not always lead to a performance goal. And then a process goal is really like the deepest level. It's like, I want to get better at. So I want to, one of the ways I'm going to get faster is if I pay more attention to my stride length, or I work on my balance on my running. So if I'm going to get that Salesman of the Year award, I need to make 10 calls a day instead of 3 calls a day, whatever those things are. Or I want to get better at engaging with my potential clients. Those are the differences in terms that make sense.
That makes a lot of sense. And so few people focus on that last one, the process, right? Because it's like the sort of boring, where is it taking me kind of thing, right? And yet, as you say, it's the deepest level, it's probably going to get you the furthest. So now let's connect it to your endurance leader model. And let's start sort of like talking about the 4-part framework. Sure. And I'm curious like how that connects to this process.
Yeah. So, the 4 parts are, as we just discussed, kind of anchoring your mindset, right? Starting with this whole notion of what is driving you, and then really understanding that at a very deep level. And I do things like talk to people about hugging their headstone, like what do you want said about you at the end of your life? Or what do you want to be known for? Or, if that's the really deep level, or even what do you want to be known for as a leader? But people don't often think about that and make that deep connection. And then it's like, well, where am I on that journey now? So then we do things that you and I would know about. Let's collect some baseline data. It's exactly how you would train for a marathon. I want to run this marathon. Have I ever run before? Did I run a half marathon last week? How I go forward might matter depending on my baseline data. So looking at those pieces and then really doing some planning around that. And then we're really focusing on the execution of that. Like okay, now I know where I am, I know where I'm going, right? How do I actually execute, and how do I deal with the inevitable challenges around that execution? Things like, running a mile you're in when things are not going well. How do you hold yourself there? The action reflection cycle. Am I paying attention to the data that I'm collecting and making adjustments along the way? Am I getting the right recovery? Right? So these are the concepts that really are critical in that execution place. In discipline, and they're closely related, but in discipline, you're really looking at how do I ensure that I'm staying kind of mentally and physically and emotionally ready. And that's mental toughness. It is things like you were just talking about, adaptability, kind of resilience, being able to shift and be agile, right? It's also learning from failure. So, all of those pieces. And then the last piece is around supports. And we just can't do as a species, I don't know how you do it without support, but really understanding how to leverage support, like an external coach or internal coaches or data that you're collecting. And I even talk about gratitude as a source of support. And I tell a personal story about that and how there's research that shows that when leaders and athletes do more gratitude work or giving themselves away, they actually have better outcomes. And they also have higher levels of self-efficacy and confidence. So it's that's kind of the entirety of the model. So I can go into more about the specifics of the goals because I talk about it a little differently in the book.
Yeah, I love this. The first thing that comes up for me as I'm writing these things down and thinking about it is like right now, right? I have many clients that are feeling lost with whether they should do strategic planning, even in the midst of so much constant change, potential reorganizations where they don't know what will happen, or loss of funding, or those kinds of things. And on the one hand, this is the perfect model to apply to get through this. And on the other hand, there's this piece about trying to identify where am I on the journey might be hard to answer. And even like the execution or the discipline. And I would love to hear more about how you would think about this in times of major uncertainty, upheaval, and those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think that we are seeing unprecedented change, upheaval, the things that, for most people, even the psychological contract with which they've understood their work for years or decades is changing. So it's very, very difficult to know where to start, where to end, how much effort to put in, what is going to happen next. Am I going to have to keep sprinting? Do I slow down? We don't know. And it's like, well, does this model work? And I kind of my contrast to that is, what other models do we use? If you're like, I think of this as, leading self, leading others, leading the organization. This is leading self in a lot of ways. And we may have so little control over some of these other factors. So we kind of need to get right with ourselves. And so it's not the be all end all, but it's got to at least start there with like, what am I about? Am I connecting with what really drives and matters to me? And if I don't have that, then, I am probably destined to be somewhat dissatisfied no matter what happens. So there's that element of it, but I also think you're bringing up something, I talk a lot in the Run the Mile You're In, that when you have that connection, it holds you through these times of uncertainty. But I think there's a fair argument, and I can't say I have the answer to it right now, is like, what if they keep changing the race course and it's become a maze? And there's no way out of it yet. Like, nobody knows where the exit is. And so I'm running and I don't, like, the finish line isn't where I thought it was. It's somewhere else. And I will say, like, this, my book, some of this was happening, but I think even now it's changing so much. But it really brings me to the concept of pacing, which is, if you go out hard, think of any run, you go out hard, you're gonna burn up. You gotta know, unless you can see the finish line, hold something back, because you will need it at some later point. You will not perform at your best. And so I often talk to people about, is life a sprint or a marathon? And people will say, it could be both. I say it's often a series of sprints within a marathon. And what it means is we have to sometimes speed up, but we also have to intentionally slow down. And the organizations may never give us those opportunities, but they might not fault us for taking them. And that's where I think people lose sight. We don't necessarily say, hang on a second, I need a minute to breathe. And maybe the organization won't fall apart or fire us. In fact, they might. We've seen a lot of that and that, but we don't seem to know what might create the firing right now. So it's like, I gotta take care of being able to sustain and hold on for the long term and allow my team to do the same. I know I said a lot.
Yeah. I have a million questions, but we're reaching an ad break. So we will come back in just a moment. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mara Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista, author of The Endurance Leader. And we will be right back in just a moment.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mara Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ann B.E. of The Endurance Leader. And as you were sharing with me about kind of what leaders need to be thinking about right now, and especially around like the journey, the execution, the discipline, a bunch of things started running through my mind about like people who have shiny object syndrome, like me, who get excited about everything and all the things, and sometimes have trouble with the pacing. And I started thinking about like derailers or what's most difficult for different kinds of people and different eras, right? And so one thing I thought about was, are there generational differences, right? With different folks, you know, in younger generations having gotten kind of comfortable with a rapid pace of information or a greater boredom if it takes too long, for example, or people who, you know, are still learning to sit with discomfort or have patience or hate the messy middle stuff, right? And it requires an incredible amount of work to have some level of discipline to stay in the Ironman, right? And therefore in a like a prolonged uncertainty. And so I'm curious, like, are there some of these elements that you mentioned that are harder than others? Have you found ways to work through them? Any success stories or any insights that you've learned as you've worked with clients with all of these experiences?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such a good question. Shiny object syndrome. You know, I think that there are, you know, I laugh about like generational differences and people complaining, and literally Aristotle like wrote about the next generation and like how horrible they were. So like it's been going on for forever. But I do think that we've got some realities around the instantaneous gratification that just weren't possible in other eras. And so when we live in such a nicheified, personally nicheified, gratifying, gratify seeking space, people can very quickly find something to distract them from their discomfort. I think, it'd be interesting to hear from your guests and some of your clients and my clients as well about like, how does that really work? Like, is it really satisfying? I think it's in the moment satisfying. But it's not like long-term gratifying. And so sitting in the messy middle is exactly the part around discipline. And what I will say is that I think it's easier when you have a plan. So if I just said, I'm going to do this Ironman, and I know I've got to just kind of keep training and just do a little more and more every week, right? It would be hard. There would be points I'd be, especially I'm traveling or I don't feel like it. And it's like, I could do something else. But I have every single day, my tiny, slightly demented coach, like puts on my schedule exactly what I have to do. And so while the goal itself might feel far away and I might not feel, I'm like, well, I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do this. So if it's like, well, okay, you want to be better at delegating and not trying to get everything done yourself. So let's try to build a plan with 2 of your direct reports, and we'll work through like the tasks that you want to transition over. And when you find yourself doing it, what's the one little thing you could do? And this leads into the whole notion of minimum viable effort, which a lot of people know from Atomic Habits. You can do this one thing and it'll keep you closer on your path. That in and of itself can help people stay motivated. So let me stop there.
Yeah. Let's get into the planning and the goal setting and like the behavior change stuff, because I think there's a lot there. And of course, as a psychologist, we have lots of tools in our toolbox around this. And a lot of people do get overwhelmed with kind of like thinking about the long term or the heaviness of everything, or, those kinds of things. So tell me more about the minimal viable effort and kind of like this idea of planning and even the accountability piece. You mentioned coaching as one accountability piece.
For sure. Yeah. And I'll just mention that one of the ideas that I really love from Atomic Habits, and all credit to James Clear for putting it together, and I talk about in the book, is really thinking about goals differently. Like he talks about, most of us start with a goal. I want to lose 20 pounds. And then we develop habits, and then we take our identity from whether or not we did that thing. And so if we don't lose that 20 pounds, somehow we're a horrible person, right? Instead of saying, I would like to be healthier, that's an identity. And then I can create habits around that. And then there's outcomes related to those habits. So it's reversing the order of that, which again goes back a little bit to mission. Like, who do I want to be? And so what he talks about, he takes from BJ Fogg, who's a researcher at Stanford, who talks about this whole notion of minimum viable effort is like, you're making a change so small, it seems stupid to even say it out loud. That's really how he describes it. Like, it's not even worth saying, it feels so small, but that's where change really happens. And most of us, even though everybody knows about SMART goals or SCAMP goals or whatever, we make our goals sometimes way too big. And so instead, if we can just break it down into little things, right, where I'm gonna talk about a success story, and it might be that the person whose success story it is actually listening. So somebody who's trying really hard around how much they're engaging with their team and like talking too much, right? And so this person was really wanting to contribute, really wanting to say something, and felt himself getting really eager to say something, and he just put his mute button on. So he could not. And he's like, I knew that if I did not have the mute button on, I was going to just go ahead. And it provided, it's this tiny little thing, right? It's just the button on the thing. But that little tiny change actually produced a really positive yield in terms of the impact it had with his team and with the other people in the space. And so we can do these small things. We can say, go back to our delegation model, right? you could delegate this task, right? It's 1% effort. What's 1%? The other thing that I think, and going back to support from coaches, I think as coaches, we sometimes do a disservice to our clients because we'll have them trying to work on things that they might only practice like maybe once a week. I want to get better at speaking in like executive meetings. Well, how often are you in those? Once a quarter? So if you think about an athlete, that's not how they work. They practice every single day. So instead breaking it down and saying, well, what's the thing we want to go for? We want to get better at voicing your ideas in a very clear way. Can you do that every day? Sure. Right. And then we build that 1% that way.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on how connected developing an endurance leader mindset is to even becoming an expert in something or being admired for something that is hard for most people to do. Like, obviously, the Ironman for you, it was both about the process of sitting with discomfort for long periods of time and how you get there, as well as reaching this phenomenal expert outcome that most of us think we can't reach. And it's both, right? I think about, people who give me, feedback about like, you're so great at that, or how did you, and I'm like, I've been doing this for like 10 to 20 years, practicing every single day. It didn't just come. And it wasn't easy most of the time.
Right. That's exactly right. And I think because there are so many people and some of them very well intended, some not, who will tell us that there are quick fixes, right? And I very clear, like in the beginning of the book, that if this is, you're looking for tools and tips and tricks, this probably isn't the book for you, because I don't see a singular thing as being the effective component of change. So I sometimes say to my clients, like when we're talking about change, like just saying, well, what thing can I do is like saying, how can I, let's try to change the molten core temperature of the earth by rearranging the lawn furniture. Like it doesn't, you might think you're having an effect, but what we really need to do is dig more deeply into why these things are that way in the first place. And to your point, like, to start making that change, we have to find at least one small way we are practicing that, getting uncomfortable, putting ourselves in spaces, or just thinking, really challenging ourselves to think differently. Use a coach who's going to say, wait a minute, you told me that you wanted to get better at this, and yet you're also saying all these reasons why you had to take over that responsibility. Which is it, and what can we do differently in the future? People who can hold you accountable, peers who can hold you accountable. I think we way underutilize the people around us as coaches to help us stay on that task day in and day out.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious, before we get to the ad break, what kind of person seeks out this kind of work?
Really good question. I will say that I think people come to it a couple different ways. People come to parts of it. They're like, sometimes they're like, I'm on the verge of burning out and I don't know what else to do. So help me, right? How can I get out of this place? Sometimes they will be like, I need to build a better, like, I know my goal is further away than I like, it's not going to just happen, and I need to do some things differently. And then sometimes I'll get people who are really like, I had a woman not too long ago who came to me, who was in a brand new job, in a brand new role, and said, I just think this model is exactly what I need to help me start this role and lead this team in the right way going forward. So it really can differ. And one of the things I try to help people remember about it is I think the mission is really important, but otherwise it's not sequential. You can kind of pick up any part of it.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. We are at the ad break, so we're going to take a moment to hear some of the other radio shows that you can listen to. You're listening to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ann Bowers-Evangelista, author of The Endurance Leader. And we will be right back in just a moment.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
Cheers.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back to The Hard Skills with me, Dr. Mira Brancu, and our guest today, Dr. Ann B.E. of The Endurance Leader. So what I want to sort of turn into that you also include, which is so critical when you're thinking about a marathon or enduring anything else long-term, is how you are able to sustain that level of focus, discipline, constantly sort of like working on your habit. And I'll give an example that I have not codified, and I'm curious to hear how you have codified this. Over the last 6 to 7 years, I have been building a company in addition to my day job, as you know. And I work nights, I work weekends, I work all the time. And people are like, aren't you exhausted? How have you been able to do this for so long? Most people cannot sustain that level of energy. And the only response I generally have is, I have a lot of energy for things I'm interested in, But the reality is that I do pay attention to my body, and I do listen. When I'm exhausted, that's it. It's over. I'm not doing anymore. And I pay attention and closely enough to not push myself ever. I take my 9 hours of sleep every night. I work out in the morning almost every day. That is like, I do not compromise, right, on those kinds of things. And you talk about that in your book around, this is a new term for me, periodization and recovery. So I'd love to hear more about what that actually looks like. How can people think about this, implement it?
Great. I love that you are talking about discipline. Like, that is the essence of discipline. And people know that on some level, but lots of people still believe in, like, the Brene Brown, exhaustion is status symbol, right? It is, there's no one who is benefiting from your exhaustion, least of all you. Yeah. And so, I love to ask people, and in the book I ask about, LeBron James, he sleeps 10 to 12 hours out of every 24-hour period, and he sleeps in a very climate-controlled environment. Is he lazy? I think most people would say no, right? Yeah. It is what he needs to do to be able to produce the best possible outcome. And so what I believe around recovery is that it should be very intentional. And what I see people doing, and this is no offense to you, but there's the whole notion of people just they hit a point of just hitting a wall, and then they feel burned out, and then they're resentful, right? You're not resentful, but lots of people get to that point and they're like, this is way too much. I can't believe I'm being asked of that, which is all critical parts of burnout. Instead of saying, I will intentionally take breaks at these junctures, I'm going to take my vacation. Lots of people plan their vacations, that are really thinking longer term, plan them well in advance. And they still look out for those moments where they need to take that time. And people say, I can't take my vacation, it wouldn't work. I really challenge that mental model, because the only person really stopping you, it's only when people feel like the world will fall apart without me. And then if I go and it doesn't, then what does that mean about me? Like, I might actually be like replaceable, or like people could work around me.
Right.
So there's all of those elements. And then just real quickly on periodization, it's the notion in endurance athletics in particular, where you kind of build up your abilities and then you take some recovery. And they're finding that kind of cadence really builds your ability to perform at higher levels. Better than somebody who is just increasing their output kind of in a one-to-one correlation over time. And so recognizing, especially as we're building skills with our, again, we're not great at teaching this either as coaches. Like, maybe we work on a different skill. We're really focused on this skill for a month, and then let's take a break from that and let's work on this other thing to give you a chance. Maybe a different level of success, maybe working a different part of your leadership assets or your brain. So these things can be really important to people building longevity.
Oh, that's brilliant. And I need to start inserting some of that stuff in my own life. So that is the next question. What is like one or two immediate next steps that people can do to build that piece into their regimen, their discipline?
Yeah. So what I would say is, if you do not have a recovery strategy, or, and again, this is different than taking a spa day, like that's lovely, but that is not a consistent plan. So, okay, we have a really hard project that we know we have to deliver at work for the next 6 weeks. I am going to intentionally take a long weekend, or I'm going to take a full 5 days off at the end of that so that I can recover. Even things like boundaries at night. I will make sure that after 8 p.m., I do not check my emails anymore. That you have to decide. They could be micro, they could be macro, but pick a couple of things that you could do to take charge of your recovery, because no one will do it for you. So that's the first thing. The second is accountability, right? So again, we're very accountable around our work products, but we're not really great about getting others to hold us accountable for taking care of our recovery. And again, the language of self-care, yes, it's good, but this is like, think like an athlete. Think like, I need to perform at my best. And if I am not doing this, I will not be able to do that. So find somebody, whether it's a family member or whether it's somebody at work, and, or use an app. Apps are great for things like that to hold you accountable. So those are the strategies I'd recommend.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it. And if people want to learn more about you and work with you, where can they find you? What can they learn?
Yes, well, they can find me at www.theenduranceleader.com, which you can see right there. And I also have this book, The Endurance Leader. I will say that I have just as of yesterday put up a self-assessment to determine your level of endurance leader capacity. So you should be able to find it on the website. Unfortunately, I don't even know where it is. I have to make sure it's up. Pardon me. I might be speaking out of turn. We might not have released it yet, but it will be up later today.
Exciting.
And I'm also at www.lumos.com, which is another page where you can find out more about my services and book time with me.
Great. And Lumos is LLUMOS.com.
Yeah,
excellent.
right.
So The Endurance Leader, pick up your copy. I have mine. It's excellent. In fact, I have both this copy and a digital copy, just in case. I'm out somewhere and, just need to pick it up, read it, remind myself about the recovery piece.
Thank you very much. I also have it in the Audible version, and I do that all the time with books.
Amazing. So, audience, what did you take away? And more importantly, what is one small change? Remember those little atomic habits we just talked about that you can implement this week based on what you learned from Anne. Share it with us on LinkedIn and at talkradio.nyc so we can cheer you on. Talk Radio is also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Apple, Spotify, Amazon podcasts, all over the place. So if today's episode resonated for you, share it with a colleague or leave a review. And if you're looking for more personalized support or leadership or team coaching, you can definitely reach out to Anne. You could also reach out to me. GoTowerscope.com is my website. The stuff that I talk about on this show is part of my research-based strategic leadership pathway roadmap that I use to help socially conscious organizational misfits on their leadership journeys. And thank you to talkradio.nyc for hosting. Together, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. Thank you for joining me and Dr. Anne Bowers-Evangelista today on this journey. This is Dr. Mara Brancu signing off. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles, including the ones that Anne just shared with us today. Thank you all. Take care. Bye.